The National Aeronautics and Space Administration is one of the most iconic agencies in the US. It has been responsible for many of America's finer moments with its research and achievements. With one of the biggest budgets of any agency in the US, NASA is equipped to fund many high-power investigations. However, by teaming up with Elon Musk, NASA has unlocked many more opportunities. The latest example is the discovery on planet Neptune. What has Musk and NASA discovered on Neptune, and how does it affect you? Join us to explore Elon Musk and NASA's insane new discovery on Neptune that changes everything. What is the longest distance you have ever traveled? If you had moved from one continent to another, most probably in an aircraft, you could have covered thousands of miles. That is child's play compared with Voyager 2's journey. Moving in the opposite direction to its twin, the Voyager 1, the spacecraft reached planet Neptune in 1989, 12 years after it took off from Earth. It was and still is on a journey through the solar system. What it discovered on Neptune was mind-blowing. The spacecraft beamed the first images of the planet's rings, but there was another discovery: a massive and violent storm. NASA scientists were not expecting the storm Voyager 2 sent the pictures of. It was spotted in the southern hemisphere, appearing as a counterclockwise wind of up to 1,500 miles per hour or 2,414 kilometers per hour. It was the strongest ever recorded. Astronomers called it the Great Dark Spot. 5 years later, it had gone by the time the Hubble Space Telescope looked at the planet. This led to lots of questions about why the winds were so strong. The strong wind, however, was not the only thing puzzling scientists about Neptune. Its temperature was also a mystery. Voyager 2 revealed that Neptune is warmer than Uranus despite being farther from the Sun. The conventional wisdom was that the farther you go from the Sun in the galaxy, the colder it became. Yet Neptune had more heat than Uranus. The question is, where is the heat on Neptune coming from? As physicist Brian Cox discussed in his BBC documentary The Planets, the source of this extra heat remains a mystery. However, the bigger puzzle was whether the two usual behaviors, that is, the strong wind and the elevated temperature, were in any way tied. Some scientists even speculated that unraveling one mystery would explain the other. But how would this be achieved? Measuring Neptune's temperature, however, is not so straightforward. For example, on Earth, you can take measurements on the solid surface and calculate the global average. If you must take a temperature of Neptune, it has to be at an altitude. This is where you need to make another decision. At what altitude will you take the measurement? There is something else about the temperature measurement taken by the Voyager 2. Obviously, it took the temperature from the outermost layer. At that point, the temperature of Neptune is not so much higher than that of Uranus. But since Neptune receives less solar illumination because it's farther from the Sun, this shouldn't be the case. What this similarity in temperature suggests is that Neptune is warmer in terms of how much heat it emits in comparison to the amount of heat it absorbs from the Sun. According to Anthony Del Genio of the NASA Goddard Institute for Space Studies, Voyager's measurements show Neptune emits more than twice as much heat as it absorbs from the Sun, while Uranus does not. This doesn't make Neptune unusual, though. In fact, it makes Uranus weird because other planets like Jupiter and Saturn also emit more heat than they absorb from the Sun. As stated earlier, the progression of temperature as you go farther away from the Sun shows Jupiter to be the warmest of the gas giants, Saturn next, then Neptune. Uranus is the one that is out of place. Del Genio explained the oddity further. Yet that unusual result is associated with the fact that Uranus does not have a significant internal heat source. In other words, Neptune is finding a way to warm itself up to the levels of Uranus, while the latter is unable to generate any extra heat other than that gleaned from the Sun. But just what is an internal heat source? In simple terms, it is heat left over from the birth of the solar system when these planets were formed. The heat contracts out of the primitive solar nebula, forming an effect known as the Kelvin-Helmholtz contraction. The extra heat source on Neptune, Jupiter, and Saturn is primarily due to gravitational contraction. As the planet slowly gravitationally contracts, the material falling inward changes its potential energy into thermal energy, which is then released upwards out of the planet. For Uranus not to have such a heat source, something must have happened to it. So the question is, why does Neptune produce heat internally but Uranus does not? There is a possibility that heat is not released from the interior at a steady rate, but instead comes in bursts. According to Joshua Tollefson of the University of California, Berkeley, we may just be seeing Uranus in a quiescent period, whereas Neptune has burped more recently. The burps are convection, which may happen in discrete episodes separated by long time periods. but we may not know if it works this way for sure unless we see one of these convective episodes take place. Or it could be an issue of Uranus being an old-timer and Neptune younger. Amy Simon, a NASA senior scientist for planetary atmosphere research at the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, explains how much heat a planet radiates depends mostly on how old it is and how quickly or slowly it releases that heat. An older planet would be colder. How quickly they release depends on the interior structure and composition, cloud layers, convection, and so on, and that can be rather complicated. NASA scientists are painfully aware that a single flyby by the Voyager 2 is not enough to explain all the mysteries locked in planet Neptune. To remedy this, a group of scientists named Conceptual Exploration Research, CONEX, have proposed a spacecraft called Arcanum. The Arcanum mission is a proposed L-class spacecraft that highlights the revolutionary approach which can now be taken to future space mission design. Weighing in at about 21 metric tons, the spacecraft would be 4 times heavier than the largest deep space probe to date, NASA and ESA's Cassini-Huygens mission, which explored Saturn from 2004 to 2017. CONEX's Arcanum would have numerous components, including an orbiter to study Neptune, a lander to study Triton, and a penetrator to strike Triton's surface and perform a seismic experiment to understand its geology and its structure. The mission could also be equipped with a telescope, allowing for studies of the outer solar system and aiding the hunt for planets around other stars. However, the problem is that there is no existing rocket that could currently launch such a craft as CONEX's Arcanum. When scientists face problems like this, they try to work around them. For example, equipment such as NASA and ESA's upcoming James Webb Space Telescope must be launched folded up and then unfurled. But the process is expensive, complex, delicate, and could be prone to error. A single mistake due to the complexities could send billions of dollars and numerous person-hours up in smoke. This is where Elon Musk comes in. Much has already been made of Musk's Starship's human spaceflight capabilities, but the rocket could also revolutionize what we know about our neighboring planets and moons. According to Hallie Bramson, a planetary scientist for Purdue University, Starship would totally change the way that we can do solar system exploration. Planetary science will just explode. Scientists are already talking about sending missions to Neptune and its largest moon in the outer solar system, bringing back vast quantities of space rock from Earth's moon and Mars, and even developing innovative ways to protect Earth from incoming asteroids. The Starship, which is being built at a Texas site dubbed Starbase, is made up of a giant spaceship on top of a large booster known as Super Heavy. Both can return to the Earth to be reused, reducing costs significantly. SpaceX has suggested launches of $2 million only using the Starship. With a drastic reduction in costs, more funds can go towards the actual equipment for the scientific experiment or exploration, rather than to the transportation. The entire vehicle will be capable of lifting 100 metric tons or 220,000 pounds of cargo and people into space on regular low-cost missions. The volume of usable space within Starship is a massive 1,000 cubic meters. You can fit the entire Eiffel Tower into the Starship payload area when the tower is disassembled, and that's got scientists excited. For example, you can transport a whole drilling rig to Neptune using the Starship and drill down a kilometer as possible on Earth today. This will afford scientists unprecedented access to the interior of the planet. Starships is like wow, says James Head, a planetary scientist from Brown University. In fact, CONEX proposes sending the Arcanum to Neptune aboard the Starship. Musk has suggested that SpaceX could launch as many as a dozen Starship test flights in 2022, with missions to the Moon and Mars both on the horizon, and plenty of scientific potentials to boot. Once Starship starts flying, the development will be very fast, says Margarita Marinova, a former senior Mars development engineer at SpaceX. There will be so many more people who will be able to fly things. Those could be anything from standalone missions using Starship to ride-along missions on the existing flight manifest. When you have a 100-ton capability, adding on science hardware is pretty easy, says Marinova. If somebody wants to buy payload space, they can have payload space. It will be a really drastic change in how we do science. Because Starship can land back on Earth, it will also theoretically be able to bring back vast amounts of samples. The sheer volume that could be returned from Neptune would give scientists on Earth unprecedented access to extraterrestrial material. That could shed light on a myriad of mysteries, such as the planet's volcanic history. One of the things that makes the Starship suitable for NASA missions to deep space like to Neptune is the method of refueling. Unlike other super heavy rockets like NASA's much-delayed Space Launch System and Blue Origin's New Glenn rocket, the upper half of the rocket is designed to be refueled in Earth orbit by other starships, so more of its lifting capability can be handed over to scientific equipment rather than the fuel. Taking humans to the Moon, for example, might require 8 separate launches, with each consecutive tanker Starship bringing up fuel to the lunar Starship that then makes its way to the Moon with scientific equipment and crew. On a mission to Neptune, the Starship will replenish all the fuel spent during the escape from the Earth and then proceed to the planet on full tanks. Musk is even proposing having fuel depots on other planets where the Starship can stop to refuel, just like you stop to refill your gas tank when on a long trip. This is ambitious, but it makes missions to planets like Neptune or moons attached to Jupiter more feasible and less complicated to coordinate. Let's hear what you think of NASA using the Starship in the comment section below.